this is what I do, share out with other people on the PB Hit Squad mail list, so they have a chance to view what we're going on to. So hello to everyone who's dialed in. As described, the session will be on zone training, why we do it, how we do it, and what some key principles to follow to make sure you get the most out of it. I'm also going to talk a little bit about how this affects people training in a group. Some people think they need to be massively overly rigid in terms of certain parts of the training program, and I don't think so. I think there's a bit of flex, so I want to highlight that to you, and therefore you make the most of your training. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and bring up my presentation. Okay, and for the guys on the call, the new guys, Colin, etc. What we do here is I do 10-15 minutes of the presentation, then we hold it open to Q&A on this topic, and then we hold it open to Q&A in general. Okay, so if you do have something that pops into your mind that you want to shout out, just hold on to it until I stop the spiel, and then what we do is I pause the recording, and then it just means that any Q&A is all private between those who dialed in. Okay, can people see my screen? A little bit of a thumbs up if you can. Perfect. Okay, cool. Okay, so what are zones and how should I use them? Training a group, question mark. A lot of people are on my plans. If they haven't done any kind of structured training, this is a bit of a new concept to them. And all of my plans use zones either for power. Hi, Jason, how are you? Or for power zones or heart rate zones, either for the bike and the run. And in terms of how we map the zones, for people on the standalone plans, for the start of each base and build phases of the plan, you'll do either an FTP test, which will map out your bike heart rate zones and also your power zones. And also you'll do a run test, which will map out your, the run test stands for, the LTHR stands for lactate threshold heart rate, which again maps out your heart rate zones. In terms of the swim stuff, we do more critical speed paces. I'm going to do a separate session on that. So anyone in a plan will do a minimum of 2 tests, one at the start of the base, one at the start of the build. Those who are in a one-to-one coached engagement may do more frequent tests. And this is depending if your coach sees in the data and the feedback that, you know, you're not really, some of the sessions aren't really taxing you when they should tax you. So that in case that you're actually fitter and you have to re-evaluate your zones. Again, for those in that scenario, if you feel that you're not being overly pushed in certain sessions, mainly in the build phase, I do recommend that you put another test in a recovery week. And if you ever think you're in that situation, just ping me an email and we'll have a quick chat over it. And we might recommend you do another zones, because you do need to keep the zones up to date, or else you're in danger of not really keeping yourself at the edge and actually sort of really pushing yourself to the next level. So why do we map zones? Well, mainly for me as a coach, it helps me control intensity and effort. For you as an athlete, it helps you know that you're putting the right effort in. And really reading between the lines, I find if athletes don't have this, they either go way too easy or way too hard. Typical age grouper approach, as in they try to kill themselves every single session and wonder why they're injured. Or typical age group approach to the other side of the spectrum is they go way too easy and they wonder why they make no progress. So this allows you to, and by the way, there will be times when you need to go easy and there's times when you need to go hard. But having the zones actually will tell you what that means in terms of effort. It also allows us to test and progress against benchmarks. So there's nothing worse for an athlete if you're doing all this work and you haven't done any races or anything different that you can't actually kind of figure out whether or not, am I fitter? Now there's certain mini metrics, you know, your resting heart rate, your kind of average pace and times, and kind of, you know, other body metrics, which will give you an indication that you are fitter and in better shape. But what the zones actually give us a percentage intake. So like when people in my one-to-one squad, they retest and I'll go, right, well, your average heart rate's gone down for that run, and your lactate threshold has gone up by 6-7 beats, as has your average pace gone down by 10 seconds. It gives you an actual objective number that can feed in. You go, actually, yes, that ties in. It also, come race day, 1 second, it allows us to give guide and input to race strategies. So again, for example, in an Ironman race, you will be looking at kind of holding for the bike upper zone 2, lower zone 3 for your watts or your or for your heart rate. And if we have up-to-date zones, we can actually have numbers that we have confidence in. So that's why control your effort, allow you get a sense of progress, and also come race day, it gives you an idea about what numbers you're aiming for. So when I was talking about zones and I was having this chat with Mark, Mark's the other assistant coach. I went, okay, right, how do I really communicate this? And he goes, well, let's try emojis. And I was like, okay, cool. All right. So I did a search and I came up with these emojis, which is against an RPE chart. RPE stands for rate of perceived exertion. This is kind of an easy way of describing to athletes, if they don't have Garmin heart rate monitors, power meters, how hard should I go? So I got this together and then I kind of mapped the zones. Now, the zones I use in my training plans are all kind of zone 1 to 5, because I like Joe Friel's approach for running and I like Joe Friel's approach for cycling. There's other ones you can use and they go into 5A, B, and there's ones that go up to 7. But realistically, once you go really past your lactate threshold to a certain point, it all means nothing. There's no way that an athlete can tell the difference between zone 5 and zone 5C or zone 6, because it's just all, you're out of breath and it's red spots in front of your eyes. So for me, zone 1 to 5, keep it simple. So what should the zones feel like? Okay. So zone 1, again, is kind of very light activity. And I do like this approach where they go, they talk about the ability to breathe. So zone 1, you should be very easy to have a full conversation with your training buddy, right? Full sentences, paragraphs, monologues. Zone 2, which is kind of, and I'll show what this maps in terms of our areas, it's kind of our recovery area. You can still have a conversation, you're talking in full sentences, but you're not going to be reading off War and Peace. Zone 3, we're getting a little bit more intense in the activity, and our little fella's getting a bit excited here, his thumbs up. You can feel you're having more shorter conversations. The breathing feels a bit more labored, but you're not panting, okay? Zone 4 upwards is where we're really sort of going, where you're really only speaking in kind of short sentences. You're kind of shorter breath, and you're kind of more concentrated on getting oxygen in rather than talking to your friend. Upper zone 4 and zone 5. This is when you're speaking in single words. It's hard to breathe because you're kind of panting a lot. Zone 5 is that at that stage, the only word that's coming out of your mouth is mom. Okay, because you're all balls out, for want of a better phrase. So that's how the zones map to our little emojis, and that's and the kind of level of RPE. So what does that mean in terms of, I call this the Smart Endurance Solutions methodology. And I said, okay, all right. So I thought, okay, so these are all, what do the zones mean for people? And people who have on my plans and have worked with me for a bit kind of know what the zones map to, but let me go through it. So zone 1, a little bit of zone 2, is recovery. That's when we're allowing the body kind of rest. It's in recovery cycle. It might be after a race. It might be part of a taper. So it's all very, very easy. Zone 2 is mainly for the base, and this covers 70.3 base. And the base is where we build up our aerobic capacity and our fitness. And the base is the same really for Olympic and also Ironman and 70.3. So it's all mainly zone 2 stuff. So it's all easy stuff. It's group cycles. It's long, slow running. Zone 3 is where we start getting more into Ironman build stuff, where it's race pace. So it's your upper zone 2, lower zone 3. So it's a bit more intense. But again, you remember, if you're going to be on race pace in an Ironman, you're going to be on an Ironman bike for 5+ hours. So it needs to be controlled, and that's where Ironman build kind of sessions come in. 70.3 is a bit higher in terms of your upper zone 3. And again, so it's, you know, you're only going to be on the bike for between 2 hours something and 3 hours, 4 hours. So it's a bit more of an intense effort. Zone 4 is when you're in sprint and Olympic distance, when you're going hard, and therefore it's gonna be intense, and you're struggling for a little bit for breath, but you're trying to get the oxygen into the lungs. And zone 5, realistically, the only time I see any of my athletes in there are when we're doing tests and we're doing speed sets. Now, as again, some people will know from the kind of way I build the plans and I do my coaching, it's not a case that you will always be in zone 1, zone 2 if you're in base. I sprinkle in test sets. I sprinkle in stuff that is going to bring into zone 3, which also brings out strength building. So that's the logic behind it. And that's what the level of intensity I'm trying to get you to think about and control it. And essentially, if you want to take something away from this, it's when we're doing something easy, it is easy. When we're doing something hard, like a test set or a speed set, it's hard. Okay. We don't want to get stuck in this kind of gray area where you're not really sure what you're doing, and you're either going too hard or or is it not hard enough or not easy enough, because you're not. That's junk mileage. So that's the logic behind it. The other thing that came up with this is kind of how do you really use zonal training to actually get you good benefits? And there's kind of 3 main principles here, right? One, you have to be patient. A lot of people, especially in the base period, when they're running and they're trying to keep in zone 2, they feel like, oh my God, to keep my heart rate that low, I have to walk a bit, I have to jog a bit, and it feels very frustrating. But again, there's loads of people on this call who have actually gone through this process and gone, okay, over time, 2-3 weeks, I've actually seen that my heart rate is still the same, but my pace is going up. So it does work. You just need to give it a bit of time. Be consistent. There's no point in going in and you're kind of nailing your long run and you're keeping it in zone 2 or in that range. You go, brilliant, I really did this. And then next week you go, oof, feeling a bit strong. And then you lash it out and you look back and you go, actually, I was in zone 3 for most of that. So that's more of a tempo effort. It's different. You're getting different training stimuli by doing that. And as I said, do what it says on the tin. When it says it's a recovery run, run it easy. When it says it's a VO2 session, when you have to run at 5K pace, you run it hard. When it's a tempo session, you're aiming for that zone 3 stuff. And then especially important in build, when you're looking to target numbers, that's where you're zoning in your own internal head computer about what it feels like to hold these numbers. So come race day, you'll actually know what you're doing. Retest, rinse, repeat. As I said, if you do get to the point where you're feeling it's way too easy, and that's, you know, you're 3-4 weeks into base, maybe you do need to do a retest on the zones. But that means you have to do a run test, and no one likes the run tests or an FTP test. So just be certain that it's not a case of you adjusting to the zones. It's a case that you're a little bit out of whack. And repeat, rinse, repeat. Okay. So this is the big topic of conversation that comes up and people get a little bit too slavish by the numbers. So listen, I wanted to go. There's a group that cycles around me, and I don't want to, because sometimes I'm going and I'm outside of my zones. There is benefits of actually training in a group, but there's kind of principles I'd give to and kind of maximize that. Because this came up, we had a bit of a discussion last week, and there's another guy I had a call with, and he goes, there's this group there, I don't know whether or not I'll be able to stick with them. I don't know will they not be, because your zones are going to be different to the next guy, okay? And that's why we do the tests, because we make them very specific to you. So I did think about this, and I went, okay, this is how I do it. In the base period, when I'm going to be doing my long, slow cycles, I find someone who's slower than me. That means I will definitely be in my zone 2 or lower. It doesn't matter if you're lower than the top end of your zone 2. If you're covering the mileage and you're in sort of low intensity, you're getting the aerobic benefit. In the build period, find someone who's a little bit faster than you, because you will need to push on And then for the times we actually need to be kind of more zone 3, or if you're meant to be doing intervals, you want to be chasing someone to actually make sure you're hitting those numbers and pushing yourself a little out of the comfort zone. It works really well for like VO2 sessions, for track sessions, and also hill repeats. Build 2, another caveat, is you also need to find the answers to the voices in your head. So some of these sessions have to be done on your own. And the reason is, come race day, you're not going to be talking to your friend or sort of jostling one another on. And this is especially for 70.3 and Ironman distance. You need to be, I'm going to go at this wattage or this target heart rate range for the next 20K, and I have to keep it in there. And if you're chatting away or you're trying to chase them, you'll drift out. So you need to be disciplined. So some of these sessions in the build more so need to be dialed in. And that means you being aware of how your body feels when it goes too high, goes too low. So that's part of the mental training of the whole game. Okay, right. So that's 20 minutes of me talking about zones. We talked a bit about how we map the zones. That's our run test and our bike and FTP test for our bike. I talked a bit about why we do that. Controls our intensity, make sure that the zones are dialed into exactly into ourselves, as close as you can get to a lab test. A follow-up point on that. Some people come to me and go, well, listen, I did this test in the lab and I've got these. I'm a big fan of actually just the run and the bike tests I give you are going to be apples with apples. I don't know what run test methodology or FTP test the guy in the lab used. So they would go, well, can I not use this? And I said, no, just retest. And then, when you test again, the exact same principle in your at home or in your kind of test area, it's apples and apples. It's more important. Talked about how the zones should feel RPE. I talked about how that maps to our 5-zone system, and then how that maps to kind of our typical training sessions that we will have, or the typical phases of our training, depending on what plan you're on. Gave you some principles of how to get the most out of training by zones. And then I said that don't rule out the option of training in a group, because a lot of this tri stuff, it's kind of lonely, and it's especially the longer stuff. If you can have company for like a 4-hour easy spin, my God, it goes much more quicker than actually just sitting there talking to the voice in your head. But again, in the build, you need to be more dialed in. Okay, guys, so that is the presentation for the people who are dialing in. I'm now going to kill the recording. I'll share this up on the I'll share that out via the mail list, and we're going to have a Q&A between the guys in the room now. Okay, so here we are. And stop recording.